If you can't trust me spending time with Trevor rebuilding our friendship, maybe this relationship isn't meant to be. Those words hit me like a slap across the face, delivered with such casual finality that I almost couldn't process what Chloe had just said. We'd been together for 4 years, building what I thought was a solid foundation in Minneapolis, and now she was essentially telling me to accept her weekly pottery sessions with her ex-boyfriend Trevor or walk away from everything we'd built together. I'm Marcus, 33, and I work as a data analytics manager for a tech consulting firm downtown. I've always been the type of guy who believes in commitment, in working through problems, in having difficult conversations instead of running away when things get complicated. I'm analytical by nature, someone who looks at data patterns and draws logical conclusions, but I'm also the kind of person who values loyalty and expects the same in return. For the past 4 years, Chloe and I had been talking about marriage, about buying a house in one of those tree-lined neighborhoods near Lake Harriet, about the kind of future that requires 2 people who actually trust each other. We'd even started looking at rings together last Christmas, discussing settings and styles during those cozy winter evenings when Minneapolis feels like the most romantic city in the world despite the brutal cold. Then Trevor came back from his military deployment 3 months ago, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about our relationship started unraveling like a poorly made sweater. The pottery workshops started innocently enough, or at least that's how Chloe presented them to me. Trevor was struggling with his transition back to civilian life, she explained, and these creative sessions every Saturday were helping him cope with what she called his post-deployment adjustment issues. She painted herself as this compassionate friend who was simply being there for someone who needed support during a difficult time, someone who understood the challenges of readjusting to normal life after months of military structure and stress. When I suggested maybe I could join them sometime, thinking it might be nice to learn a new skill while supporting Trevor's recovery, or that perhaps Trevor should consider professional therapy instead of leaning on my girlfriend for emotional support, Chloe would get defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive of veterans' mental health struggles. She'd lecture me about how important it was to be there for people who'd served our country, as if I hadn't been the one encouraging her to maintain friendships and support systems throughout our entire relationship. What really bothered me wasn't just the time she was spending with Trevor, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way she seemed to light up when she talked about their pottery sessions, the way she'd spend extra time getting ready for them, selecting outfits with the same care she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners, the way she'd come home glowing and energized in a way she hadn't been with me in months. She described their projects in detail, how Trevor was such a natural artist despite never having touched clay before his deployment, how he had these gentle hands that could shape clay into beautiful forms, how they'd lost track of time working side by side in comfortable silence while soft music played in the background. She'd show me photos of their ceramic pieces with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new passion, but never seemed interested in sharing that passion with me. Meanwhile, our own weekend plans became secondary to her Saturday pottery schedule, and she'd often return from these sessions too tired for the dinner dates or activities we'd previously enjoyed together, claiming the creative process was emotionally draining and she needed quiet time to process her artistic experiences. The breaking point came on a particularly cold February evening when I finally asked her directly whether she thought it was appropriate for someone in a committed relationship to spend every single Saturday with their ex-boyfriend, especially when that person had explicitly told me they still had feelings for her before he deployed. I'd been holding this conversation inside me for weeks, analyzing every angle, trying to find a way to express my concerns without sounding controlling or insecure, but the words finally spilled out during what should have been a peaceful dinner at home. That's when she delivered her ultimatum with such cold certainty that I realized she'd probably been building up to this moment for weeks, maybe even rehearsing the exact phrasing in her mind. She stood there in our kitchen, arms crossed, telling me that if I couldn't trust her to maintain a friendship with someone who meant a lot to her, then maybe I wasn't the kind of partner she needed in her life. The way she emphasized trust made it clear that she considered my concerns to be character flaws rather than legitimate relationship issues that deserved discussion and compromise. I looked at this woman I'd been planning to propose to, this person I'd turned down a promotion in Tokyo to stay with because I thought we were building something permanent together, and realized that she'd already made her choice. She wasn't asking for my understanding or trying to find a compromise that would work for both of us. like scheduling pottery sessions less frequently or including me occasionally or setting some basic boundaries about time and emotional intimacy. She was telling me to accept a situation that made me fundamentally uncomfortable or lose her completely. The fact that she was willing to end 4 years together rather than establish some basic boundaries with her ex-boyfriend told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in her priorities. In her mind, Trevor's need for artistic therapy trumped my need for basic respect and consideration in our relationship. So I agreed with her. I told her she was absolutely right, that maybe our relationship wasn't meant to be if this was where we'd ended up after 4 years of what I thought had been mutual respect and understanding. The shock on her face was almost comical, like she'd expected me to grovel or beg her to reconsider, to accept whatever crumbs of attention she was willing to offer me between her pottery sessions with Trevor. She'd probably anticipated tears, arguments, promises to be more understanding, anything except calm acceptance of her ultimatum. Instead, I walked into our bedroom, pulled out my phone, and called my boss to accept that Tokyo position I'd been declining for months because I thought my future was in Minneapolis with her. The promotion came with a 60% salary increase and the chance to lead digital transformation projects across Asia, opportunities I'd been sacrificing for a relationship that apparently meant more to me than it did to her. 2 hours later, I was booking my flight and sending her a photo from the departure gate at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, along with a simple message thanking her for helping me see things clearly. For 8 months, I'd been accepting Chloe's explanations about her Saturday pottery workshops with Trevor, believing her when she described them as therapeutic creative sessions helping a struggling veteran readjust to civilian life. I trusted her completely when she talked about the community center classes, the group environment, the professional instructor who specialized in art therapy for people dealing with trauma. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to accept such elaborate explanations without ever questioning the details or asking to see any of the ceramic pieces she claimed to be creating week after week. The truth about these so-called workshops started unraveling through casual conversations with mutual friends, the kind of innocent revelations that make you realize you've been living in a carefully constructed lie for months. It was Jake, a guy from our hiking group, who first mentioned seeing Chloe and Trevor together at a downtown coffee shop on a Sunday morning, looking very cozy and intimate for people who supposedly only met for organized pottery classes on Saturdays. When I mentioned this to Chloe, she quickly explained that Trevor had asked her to extend their sessions to include Sunday morning coffee dates where they could discuss their artistic progress and plan future projects. She made it sound perfectly reasonable, like any dedicated student would want additional time to analyze their creative development with their instructor. What she failed to mention was that these coffee dates were taking place at romantic little cafes in the Arts District, places that specialized in couples brunch menus rather than casual meetups between pottery classmates. The revelation that really shattered my trust came when I discovered through Lisa, who worked at the community center where Chloe claimed to attend classes, that they didn't even offer pottery workshops on Saturdays, and hadn't for over 2 years due to budget cuts and lack of instructor availability. When I pressed Lisa for more details, she mentioned that the only pottery classes available were Tuesday evening sessions for seniors and Thursday afternoon workshops for children with developmental disabilities. This meant that for 8 months, Chloe had been lying to me about the basic premise of her entire Saturday routine, creating an elaborate fiction about community center classes that simply didn't exist anywhere in our city. Armed with this information, I started paying closer attention to the subtle details I'd been ignoring for months. Chloe would spend an unusual amount of time getting ready for these supposed pottery workshops, selecting outfits that seemed more appropriate for date nights than messy artistic activities involving clay and kills. She'd wear her favorite perfume, style her hair with more care than she showed for her actual job at the marketing firm, and choose jewelry that she'd normally save for special occasions. When she returned from these sessions, her clothes were always pristine, never showing the telltale signs of working with clay that you'd expect from someone who'd spent hours learning pottery techniques. Her hands were never stained, her fingernails remained perfectly manicured, and she never smelled like the earthy, metallic scent that clings to people who've been handling wet clay for extended periods. The Wednesday evening critique sessions were another layer of deception that became apparent once I started questioning the logistics of her pottery education. Chloe explained these midweek meetings as necessary follow-up sessions where Trevor would help her analyze the pieces she'd created during their Saturday workshops, offering professional guidance on technique improvements and artistic development. She'd return from these Wednesday sessions energized and glowing, talking enthusiastically about breakthrough moments in her artistic journey and how Trevor's expert feedback was helping her discover hidden creative talents she never knew she possessed. The way she described these critique sessions made them sound like intimate tutorials between a gifted teacher and his most promising student, complete with detailed discussions about form, texture, and the emotional expression inherent in ceramic art. What bothered me most about these expanding sessions was how they began to dominate not just Chloe's weekend schedule, but her entire week. She'd spend Monday and Tuesday anticipating her Wednesday critique session. Wednesday evening was obviously occupied with Trevor, Thursday and Friday were devoted to preparing for Saturday's workshop, and Sunday morning coffee dates meant our entire weekend revolved around her pottery schedule with her ex-boyfriend. Our own relationship became something that happened in the spaces between her artistic pursuits with Trevor, relegated to whatever time and energy she had left after fulfilling her obligations to his creative guidance and emotional support needs. The breaking point came when I suggested joining them for one of these pottery workshops, thinking it might be interesting to learn a new skill while spending time with Chloe and supporting Trevor's recovery process. I'd researched local pottery studios, found several that offered couples classes or beginner workshops, and thought it could be a fun way to bridge the gap between my discomfort with their private sessions and my desire to be supportive of therapeutic activities. Chloe's reaction was immediate and defensive, explaining that the studio space was extremely limited and could only accommodate the current participants who'd been attending since the beginning of Trevor's recovery program. She claimed that adding new people would disrupt the delicate therapeutic environment that had taken months to establish, and that Trevor was still too emotionally fragile to handle changes in his support group dynamic. When I offered to wait for the next session cycle to begin, or suggested that perhaps I could observe without participating to better understand what made these workshops so beneficial for Trevor's mental health, Chloe became increasingly agitated and accused me of trying to invade the safe space they'd created for his healing process. She lectured me about the importance of respecting boundaries in therapeutic relationships, insisting that my presence would undermine the trust and vulnerability that were essential components of Trevor's artistic therapy. The vehemence of her objections made it clear that my involvement in these pottery sessions was absolutely not welcome, despite her previous claims that they were innocent creative activities that any supportive partner should understand and appreciate. The final piece of evidence came when I realized that in 8 months of weekly pottery workshops and critique sessions, Chloe had never brought home a single ceramic piece, never displayed any artwork in our apartment, and never demonstrated any of the techniques she claimed to be learning. When I asked to see some of her creations, she explained that all student work had to remain at the studio until the firing process was complete, which could take several weeks depending on the kiln schedule and the complexity of the glazing techniques being employed. This explanation might have been believable for a few weeks, but after 8 months of regular attendance, she should have had dozens of completed pieces to show for her artistic education, unless she was the world's most unsuccessful pottery student or the workshops weren't actually focused on creating ceramic art. After our confrontation about trust and ultimatums, Chloe's immediate response was to prove exactly how little our 4-year relationship actually meant to her. Within hours of my departure for the airport, she was posting Instagram stories from what she claimed was Trevor's pottery studio, but the images told a completely different story than the therapeutic workshops she'd been describing to me for months. Instead of a proper studio space with pottery wheels, kilns, and the organized chaos of serious ceramic work, her photos showed an intimate apartment setting with a single pottery wheel positioned near floor-to-ceiling windows, wine glasses on a nearby table, and romantic lighting that had nothing to do with the practical illumination needed for detailed artistic work. The whole scene looked more like a carefully staged date night than a therapeutic creative session designed to help a veteran cope with post-deployment stress. I was sitting in the departure lounge, watching my phone light up with notifications from her social media accounts, and the irony wasn't lost on me that she was documenting her evening with Trevor while I was literally flying away to start a new life in Tokyo. The photos showed her hands covered in clay, laughing as Trevor guided her movements at the pottery wheel, both of them looking relaxed and intimate in a way that made it obvious these sessions had never been about art therapy or friendship support. The romantic lighting, the wine, the close physical contact necessary for pottery instruction, it all painted a picture of two people who were definitely not maintaining appropriate boundaries for someone in a committed relationship with another person. The apartment building's security footage, which I later learned about through my coworker Dave who knew someone in Trevor's building, showed that these private pottery sessions had been happening in Trevor's downtown studio apartment rather than any community center or professional workshop space. For 8 months, Chloe had been visiting Trevor's personal residence for what were essentially private dates disguised as artistic instruction, spending hours alone with her ex-boyfriend in an intimate setting while telling me they were participating in group therapy sessions designed to support his mental health recovery. The level of deception required to maintain this fiction for so long was actually impressive in its thoroughness and attention to detail. Dave worked at the same gym as Trevor, and within a week of my departure, he started hearing stories that made my blood run cold and my decision to leave feel absolutely brilliant in retrospect. Trevor had been bragging to other veterans in their workout group about his pottery student, describing Chloe as this gorgeous woman whose boyfriend was too stupid to realize what was happening right under his nose. He'd been showing photos of their sessions to anyone who would look, images that clearly depicted romantic encounters rather than therapeutic artistic activities. These weren't pictures of innocent pottery instruction, but intimate moments between two people who were obviously involved in something that went far beyond friendship or professional teaching relationships. When Chloe's family staged what they called an intervention 2 weeks after my departure, trying to convince me to return and fight for the relationship, I finally revealed the text message screenshots that Dave had forwarded to me from Trevor's social media accounts. Trevor had posted in a veterans group chat about teaching this gorgeous girl pottery, bragging about how her boyfriend thought they were just making bowls while he was actually making moves on someone else's girlfriend. The messages were explicit about his intentions and dismissive about the deception they were maintaining, treating my ignorance as a source of entertainment rather than recognizing the cruelty of their elaborate lie. Chloe's parents were devastated when they saw the evidence of their daughter's deception, particularly her mother, who had always prided herself on raising children with strong moral values and respect for commitment. They'd been defending Chloe's right to maintain friendships and pursue artistic interests, arguing that I was being controlling and unreasonable in my expectations about appropriate boundaries in relationships. Seeing Trevor's actual messages about their pottery sessions, complete with crude jokes about artistic positions and references to glazing techniques that were obviously sexual innuendos, forced them to confront the reality that their daughter had been carrying on an emotional and likely physical affair while manipulating everyone around her into supporting her deception. The most damning evidence came from Sarah, a nurse who worked night shifts at the downtown hospital and happened to be Trevor's actual girlfriend, someone none of us had known about during the entire 8 months of pottery workshops. Sarah discovered the romantic evening sessions through Instagram posts that showed Trevor's apartment during times when she was working 12-hour shifts, thinking he was home alone dealing with his post-deployment adjustment issues. She'd been supporting what she thought was his therapeutic pottery hobby, even buying him expensive clay and tools for Christmas, not realizing that his artistic pursuits were actually elaborate seduction sessions with another man's girlfriend. When Sarah confronted both Trevor and Chloe publicly at the coffee shop where they'd been having their Sunday morning critique sessions, the scene was apparently spectacular according to multiple witnesses who knew all three of them from various social circles around Minneapolis. Sarah revealed that Trevor had been telling her the pottery classes were therapy for his PTSD, claiming that Chloe was just a lonely friend helping him heal through creative expression and artistic collaboration. He'd convinced Sarah that the evening sessions were necessary for his mental health, that the therapeutic value of working with clay was helping him process traumatic experiences from his deployment, and that Chloe's presence provided emotional support that was crucial for his recovery process. The public confrontation exposed the elaborate web of lies that both Trevor and Chloe had been maintaining, not just to me, but to Sarah, to Chloe's family, and to the entire veteran support network that had been cheering for Trevor's artistic recovery. Sarah had been working extra shifts to support what she thought was her boyfriend's therapeutic hobby, sacrificing her own social life and sleep schedule to accommodate his pottery therapy sessions, never suspecting that she was actually enabling his affair with someone else's girlfriend. The revelation that her compassionate support for his mental health had been manipulated to provide cover for romantic liaisons with Chloe destroyed Sarah's trust in both of them and exposed the casual cruelty of their deception to everyone in their overlapping social circles. Meanwhile, my new life in Tokyo was exceeding every expectation I'd had when I made that impulsive decision to accept the promotion while sitting in our kitchen listening to Chloe's ultimatum about trust and pottery workshops. The company had provided me with a luxury corporate apartment in Shibuya, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, modern furnishings that made my Minneapolis apartment look like a college dorm room, and amenities that reminded me daily how much my life had improved since leaving behind the drama and deception that had become my normal routine. The 60% salary increase meant I was finally able to save substantial money while also experiencing everything Tokyo had to offer, from incredible restaurants to weekend trips exploring different regions of Japan, activities that felt like genuine adventures rather than the carefully planned compromises that had characterized my relationship with someone who was secretly spending her creative energy on another man. My role leading digital transformation projects across Asia was challenging and rewarding in ways that made me realize how much I'd been undervaluing my own professional capabilities while focused on maintaining a relationship with someone who saw my career primarily as a source of financial stability rather than something worth celebrating. Working with international teams, implementing cutting-edge technology solutions, and traveling to cities like Seoul, Singapore, and Bangkok for client meetings gave me a sense of purpose and accomplishment that reminded me who I was when I wasn't constantly wondering whether my girlfriend was being honest about her weekend activities. The professional recognition I was receiving from colleagues and clients made it clear that my decision to prioritize my career over a relationship built on deception had been absolutely the right choice for my personal and professional development. Back in Minneapolis, however, Chloe was launching what could only be described as a social media warfare campaign designed to rewrite the history of our relationship and paint me as the villain in a story where she was clearly the person who had chosen pottery sessions with her ex-boyfriend over 4 years of commitment and future planning. Her Instagram posts became increasingly dramatic and self-pitying, with carefully curated photos of herself looking contemplative and wounded, accompanied by captions about how some people abandon relationships when things get challenging, how career obsession can destroy even the strongest bonds, and how she was learning to heal from the trauma of being emotionally abandoned by someone she had trusted with her heart. The irony of someone who had been secretly carrying on an affair accusing me of emotional abandonment was not lost on our mutual friends, many of whom were beginning to piece together the timeline of her pottery workshops and my sudden departure for Tokyo. The most revealing aspect of her social media campaign was how it completely avoided any mention of Trevor or the pottery workshops that had supposedly been so important to her artistic development and his mental health recovery. Instead, she focused entirely on portraying herself as a woman who had been blindsided by her partner's sudden decision to prioritize career advancement over relationship commitment, someone who had been working hard to support a veteran friend's recovery only to be punished for her compassion and loyalty by a jealous and controlling boyfriend. She posted inspirational quotes about knowing your worth, about not settling for people who don't appreciate your kindness, and about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your caring nature rather than trying to limit your ability to help others in need. The carefully crafted victim narrative was impressive in its thoroughness, but it required completely erasing the central role that Trevor and their romantic pottery sessions had played in destroying our relationship. The truth about her pottery deception began emerging in spectacular fashion when Sarah's confrontation at the coffee shop became public knowledge among their various social circles, leading to a cascade of revelations that completely undermined Chloe's carefully constructed narrative about innocent artistic pursuits and therapeutic support for a struggling veteran. People who had been defending Chloe's right to maintain friendships and pursue creative interests suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about her character and decision-making process, particularly when they learned about the extent of the lies she had been maintaining for 8 months while planning a future with someone who had no idea about the elaborate deception happening every Saturday and Wednesday evening. The gap between her public persona as a supportive friend and the reality of her secretive romantic relationship with Trevor became impossible to ignore once the details started spreading through their interconnected social networks. Sarah's decision to publicly reveal Trevor's deception about using pottery therapy as cover for romantic encounters with another man's girlfriend sent shockwaves through the veteran support community that had been celebrating his artistic recovery and creative healing process. The nurse who had been working extra shifts to support what she believed was her boyfriend's therapeutic hobby became a sympathetic figure who had been manipulated just as extensively as I had been, someone whose genuine compassion for veteran mental health issues had been exploited to provide cover for behavior that violated every principle of trust and honesty that should exist between committed partners. When Sarah shared screenshots of Trevor's messages to other veterans, bragging about his pottery student and making crude jokes about artistic techniques, the veterans community quickly distanced themselves from someone who had been using their support network to facilitate and celebrate his affair with someone else's girlfriend. The most damaging revelation came when multiple witnesses from the coffee shop confrontation began sharing their accounts of Sarah's public revelation about Trevor's lies and Chloe's role in maintaining the deception about therapeutic pottery sessions. These first-hand accounts included details about how shocked and devastated Sarah appeared when she realized that her boyfriend's artistic therapy had actually been romantic encounters with another man's girlfriend, how defensive and angry Chloe became when confronted with evidence of the true nature of their sessions, and how Trevor attempted to minimize his deception by claiming that the pottery workshops had started as genuine therapy but evolved into something more personal over time. The public nature of this confrontation meant that Chloe could no longer control the narrative about her pottery workshops or maintain the fiction that they had been innocent creative activities misunderstood by a jealous and controlling partner who had abandoned her for career advancement opportunities in Asia. 3 weeks after my departure for Tokyo, while I was settling into my new routine of morning meetings with Singapore clients and evening video conferences with teams in Seoul, Chloe made a decision that demonstrated just how little she understood about the finality of her ultimatum and my response to it. She booked a flight to Tokyo and somehow obtained the address of my corporate apartment building, information that required either significant detective work or help from someone with access to my company's employee directory. I discovered her presence in the most uncomfortable way possible when my building's concierge called to inform me that a woman claiming to be my girlfriend was in the lobby, insisting that she needed to see me immediately to discuss urgent personal matters that couldn't wait for normal communication channels. Standing in the marble-floored lobby of my Shibuya apartment building, wearing the same carefully selected outfit style she'd used for her pottery sessions with Trevor, Chloe looked simultaneously determined and desperate, like someone who had convinced herself that grand romantic gestures could undo months of deception and betrayal. She'd clearly spent considerable money on this impulsive trip, money she probably couldn't afford given her marketing job salary, but her presence in my new city represented the kind of dramatic confrontation I'd specifically moved across the world to avoid. The fact that she'd tracked down my address and traveled internationally without any indication that I wanted to see her demonstrated a level of entitlement and disrespect for boundaries that made me grateful for my decision to accept the Tokyo position. The conversation that followed, conducted in a nearby cafe because I refused to bring her to my apartment, revealed the depth of Chloe's self-deception about the nature of our relationship and the reasons for its end. She claimed to be there to fight for our love, explaining that she'd ended all contact with Trevor and realized that their pottery sessions had been a mistake born of misguided compassion for his post-deployment struggles rather than any genuine romantic interest. Her version of events painted her as someone who had been manipulated by Trevor's claims of needing artistic therapy for his mental health recovery, a caring person whose natural empathy had been exploited by someone who took advantage of her desire to help veterans adjust to civilian life. During our confrontation at the cafe, Chloe admitted to crossing some emotional boundaries with Trevor but insisted that their pottery sessions had never become physical despite all evidence suggesting otherwise. She described their relationship as an emotional affair that had gotten out of hand, something that had started innocently but evolved beyond appropriate limits due to Trevor's persuasive arguments about needing creative support for his therapeutic recovery process. According to her revised narrative, she'd been guilty of poor judgment and insufficient attention to appropriate boundaries, but not of the deliberate deception and romantic involvement that had been documented through social media posts and Trevor's own bragging to other veterans. When I remained unmoved by her explanations and refused to consider reconciliation, Chloe became increasingly desperate and resorted to manipulation tactics that revealed the calculating nature of her personality. She claimed to be pregnant with my child, presenting this announcement as both an explanation for her impulsive flight to Tokyo and a reason why we needed to work through our relationship problems for the sake of our future family. The pregnancy claim was delivered with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested it had been planned as her final argument for reconciliation, a revelation designed to override my logical objections to rebuilding trust with someone who had spent 8 months lying about her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. However, Chloe's pregnancy claim immediately fell apart under the most basic scrutiny, revealing it to be another desperate lie from someone who seemed incapable of honest communication even when attempting to repair damage from previous deceptions. When I pointed out that we hadn't been intimate in months due to her constant pottery exhaustion and emotional distance, scheduling conflicts that now made perfect sense given her real activities on weekends and Wednesday evenings, she broke down completely and admitted that the pregnancy story was fabricated. The admission that she'd been willing to lie about pregnancy to manipulate me into reconciliation demonstrated a level of moral flexibility that made me absolutely certain that ending our relationship had been the right decision. The breakdown that followed was messy and public, attracting attention from other cafe patrons who couldn't help but notice the American woman sobbing loudly while her companion remained calm and unmoved by her emotional display. Chloe confessed that she'd been lying about the pregnancy because she was terrified of losing me permanently, that she'd realized during the weeks since my departure that Trevor had been using her desire to help with his recovery as a way to manipulate her into romantic situations that violated the trust and commitment she owed to our relationship. She claimed to have seen Trevor's true character only after my departure, when he'd immediately moved on to pursuing other women in the veteran support community using similar stories about needing artistic therapy for his post-deployment adjustment challenges. Despite her tears and confessions, Chloe continued to minimize her own responsibility for the elaborate deception that had destroyed our relationship, portraying herself primarily as a victim of Trevor's psychological manipulation rather than as someone who had made conscious choices to lie and prioritize her ex-boyfriend's supposed therapeutic needs over her committed relationship with me. When it became clear that I wasn't going to be swayed by her victim narrative, she began making promises about changing her behavior and setting better boundaries, even offering to move to Tokyo if that would help rebuild our relationship, claiming that a fresh start in a new country might be exactly what we needed to overcome the damage caused by her poor judgment and Trevor's manipulation of her compassionate nature. I told her that her flight back to Minneapolis was leaving that evening, information I'd confirmed by checking her return ticket details that she'd foolishly shared during her desperate explanation of why she'd come to Tokyo to fight for our relationship. The symbolism of her same-day departure wasn't lost on either of us, and she flew back to Minneapolis that night while continuing to send manipulative messages about waiting forever and how she'd learned to recognize the difference between genuine friendship and romantic manipulation. The messages continued for weeks, alternating between promises to change and threats to move on with someone who would appreciate her caring nature and willingness to support people who needed help during difficult periods of their lives. Chloe's pattern of quickly rebounding from our relationship became apparent within weeks of her failed Tokyo intervention, demonstrating that her dramatic claims about waiting forever and learning from her mistakes had been just another manipulation tactic designed to maintain some level of control over my emotions and decisions. Her social media accounts began featuring Blake, her personal trainer from the gym she joined after our breakup, a muscular guy in his late 20s who apparently represented her next attempt at finding someone who would appreciate her caring nature and provide the validation she craved after the public embarrassment of her pottery workshop deception being exposed throughout Minneapolis social circles. The speed with which she transitioned from sobbing about our lost love in a Tokyo cafe to posting couple photos with Blake suggested that her emotional investment in our 4-year relationship had been far more shallow than her dramatic declarations had implied. The social media campaign surrounding her new relationship with Blake was almost identical to the victim narrative she'd constructed after my departure, complete with inspirational posts about finding your true soulmate and how the universe brings the right person when you're ready to grow beyond past limitations and embrace authentic connections with people who understand your worth. She posted frequently about Blake's understanding of her need for emotional support during her healing process, his appreciation for her compassionate nature, and how refreshing it was to be with someone who celebrated her caring personality rather than trying to control her friendships and artistic pursuits. The irony of someone who had conducted an 8-month affair under the guise of pottery therapy lecturing about authentic connections was apparently lost on her, but her followers seemed to appreciate the inspirational content about personal growth and finding true love after surviving emotionally abusive relationships. Meanwhile, Trevor's behavior was becoming increasingly problematic in ways that revealed his true character and made me grateful that Chloe's pottery workshops had ultimately led to the end of our relationship rather than continuing indefinitely while I remained unaware of her deception. Through my professional network, I discovered that Trevor had been hired by my company's Minneapolis branch as part of a veteran hiring initiative designed to help former military personnel transition into civilian careers in technology consulting. The coincidence seemed unlikely until I realized that Trevor had probably researched my employer while bragging about his pottery student to other veterans, learning enough about the company to target them specifically when seeking employment opportunities that would advance his career while potentially providing access to information about my new life in Tokyo. Trevor's attempts to reconnect through LinkedIn were persistent and increasingly inappropriate, suggesting that he viewed our shared history through the lens of male bonding rather than recognizing the serious damage his deception had caused to multiple relationships and his own reputation within the veterans community. His messages portrayed the pottery workshop situation as a misunderstanding between friends, something we should be able to laugh about over drinks while discussing our shared experiences in the corporate consulting world. He seemed genuinely puzzled by my complete lack of response to his networking attempts, as if 8 months of elaborate deception designed to facilitate an affair with my girlfriend was just a minor social awkwardness that could be resolved through professional camaraderie and shared war stories about navigating office politics in international consulting firms. The situation became more complicated when Trevor was transferred to our Tokyo office as part of the same veteran hiring initiative that had brought him into the company, leading to the surreal experience of encountering the man who had destroyed my previous relationship in the elevator of my new workplace on a regular basis. His presence in the building meant that I had to maintain professional courtesy with someone who had spent months manipulating my girlfriend into romantic encounters disguised as therapeutic pottery sessions, a level of emotional compartmentalization that required significant mental energy and reminded me daily of the betrayal that had led to my geographical escape from Minneapolis drama. Trevor's attempts to establish workplace friendship were relentless, including invitations to join him for drinks with other American expats in Tokyo, suggestions that we grab lunch to discuss our mutual adjustment to Japanese business culture, and persistent efforts to position himself as a fellow outsider who understood the challenges of building a new life in an unfamiliar country. The most uncomfortable aspect of Trevor's workplace presence was his continued inability to recognize the severity of his deception or the inappropriate nature of his attempts to rebuild our friendship, suggesting a level of social blindness or narcissistic thinking that explained how he'd convinced himself that lying about therapeutic pottery sessions was acceptable behavior between adults. During our awkward elevator encounters, he would make casual references to mutual friends from Minneapolis, ask about my adjustment to Tokyo life, and generally behave as if we were old buddies who'd had a minor disagreement rather than recognizing himself as the person whose elaborate deception had forced me to relocate internationally to escape the drama he'd created. His casual attitude about the situation made it clear that he viewed the entire pottery workshop affair as a successful conquest rather than understanding the genuine damage he'd caused to multiple people's lives and relationships. The irony of working 2 floors above someone who had been bragging to other veterans about his pottery student while I was planning to propose to the woman he was pursuing was not lost on me, but it also served as a daily reminder of how much better my life had become since leaving Minneapolis and the toxic dynamics that had characterized my final months with Chloe. Trevor's presence in the building had initially been annoying, But over time it became almost amusing to observe his persistent attempts to normalize our relationship while everyone else in the office who knew our history treated him with the professional courtesy due to a colleague who lacked basic social awareness. The other American expats in our Tokyo office had quickly figured out the basic outline of our shared history through office gossip and social media detective work, leading to a situation where Trevor was generally excluded from social gatherings while being maintained in a bubble of polite professional interaction that prevented any real friendship development with his colleagues. By this point, Trevor had gained a reputation around the office as the pottery guy, a nickname that followed him through meetings and casual conversations as colleagues made subtle references to his artistic hobbies whenever discussing weekend plans or creative pursuits, ensuring that his elaborate deception would continue to follow him professionally long after the actual pottery workshops had ended. The fact that he seemed oblivious to the mockery inherent in this nickname demonstrated the same lack of social awareness that had allowed him to convince himself that 8 months of romantic deception could be brushed aside in favor of professional networking and workplace friendship with the person he'd betrayed. 2 years after my departure from Minneapolis, the karma that had been slowly building around both Chloe and Trevor finally reached its inevitable conclusion in ways that were both satisfying and educational about the long-term consequences of deception and manipulation. Chloe's relationship with Blake imploded in spectacular fashion when she discovered that his weekend training sessions with his ex-girlfriend involved the same kind of romantic deception that she'd practiced during her pottery workshops with Trevor, creating a perfect mirror of her own betrayal that forced her to experience the receiving end of elaborate lies designed to facilitate an affair. The irony of someone who had spent 8 months lying about artistic therapy sessions being devastated by similar deception from her personal trainer boyfriend was apparently lost on her, but the emotional and financial consequences were severe enough to completely destabilize the new life she'd been building since my departure for Tokyo. Blake's fitness business investments turned out to be another layer of deception that demonstrated his complete lack of integrity and financial responsibility, leading to a situation where Chloe found herself legally and financially entangled with someone who had been using her credit cards to fund his lifestyle while maintaining romantic relationships with multiple women under various pretenses related to personal training and fitness consultation. When Blake disappeared overnight after maxing out her credit cards for what he claimed were essential equipment purchases for their shared fitness business venture, Chloe was left with over $23,000 in debt, no romantic partner, and a ruined credit score that would affect her ability to maintain her lifestyle or even rent a decent apartment without significant financial assistance from her family. The financial devastation was compounded by her loss of the marketing job that had provided the income necessary to maintain her pre-Blake lifestyle, a termination that resulted from poor performance during her emotional spiral following Blake's betrayal and financial theft. According to mutual friends who maintained contact with both of us through social media, Chloe's work performance had declined dramatically during her relationship with Blake, partially due to the distraction of managing what she thought was their shared fitness business, but primarily because of the emotional energy required to maintain the same kind of elaborate deception that she'd previously practiced during her pottery workshops with Trevor. 2 years after insisting that Trevor's pottery therapy was more important than our relationship, Chloe reached out to me through a fake LinkedIn profile that attempted to disguise her identity but was obviously her based on the writing style and specific references to our shared history in Minneapolis. The message revealed the extent of her personal and financial collapse, including her move back to her parents' house, the $23,000 in credit card debt that Blake had accumulated before disappearing, and her inability to find stable employment due to the combination of her damaged professional reputation and poor references from her previous marketing position. She claimed to be reaching out because she'd realized that I was the only person who had ever truly understood her and appreciated her caring nature, conveniently forgetting that her caring nature had been primarily directed toward Trevor during the 8 months when she was planning our future while conducting her pottery workshop affair. Meanwhile, my own life in Tokyo had evolved in ways that made Chloe's desperate outreach seem like a message from a completely different universe, one where I was still the same person who would accept elaborate lies about pottery workshops instead of someone who had built a new life based on honesty, professional success, and genuine romantic connection. I'd been promoted to regional director for Asia-Pacific operations, a position that came with significant authority over digital transformation projects across multiple countries and a compensation package that reflected my value to the organization. More importantly, I'd become engaged to Akiko, a Japanese architect who specialized in sustainable building design and brought the kind of intellectual partnership and emotional honesty to our relationship that I'd never experienced during my years with someone who was capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions for months at a time. Akiko's reaction to the pottery workshop story was a mixture of amusement and bewilderment, particularly her inability to understand how someone could invest so much creative energy in constructing lies when the same effort could have been directed toward actually building something meaningful with their committed partner. Her perspective on the situation helped me recognize how abnormal the dynamics with Chloe had been, and how much energy I'd been wasting trying to maintain a relationship with someone who viewed deception as an acceptable tool for getting what she wanted rather than recognizing the importance of trust and honesty in building a sustainable future together. When Akiko heard about Chloe's fake LinkedIn profile and desperate attempts at reconciliation, she laughed and said it sounded like watching someone dig their own grave while complaining about the shovel. When I politely declined Chloe's attempts at reconciliation through the fake LinkedIn profile, explaining that I was engaged to someone who appreciated honesty and direct communication, her response revealed the depth of her continued self-deception and inability to take responsibility for the choices that had led to her current situation. She claimed that Akiko couldn't possibly understand me the way she did, that our history together meant something that couldn't be replicated with someone from a different cultural background, and that my engagement was probably just a rebound relationship designed to help me avoid dealing with the genuine emotional connection we'd shared before Trevor's manipulation destroyed our trust. The message demonstrated that even after 2 years of consequences resulting from her deception, she still viewed herself as the victim of circumstances rather than recognizing her own responsibility for choosing pottery workshops with her ex-boyfriend over her committed relationship. Trevor's situation had also deteriorated significantly during the 2 years since our initial encounter in the Tokyo office building, though his decline was more professional than personal and seemed to result from his continued inability to understand appropriate workplace boundaries and social dynamics. Despite his veteran hiring initiative protection, he'd managed to alienate most of his colleagues through persistent attempts to establish personal relationships that made people uncomfortable, and his reputation as the pottery guy had evolved into something more damaging as people began to understand the actual story behind the nickname, leading to a situation where he was professionally tolerated but socially isolated within an office environment that valued both competence and basic social awareness. The final irony was that Trevor continued working 2 floors below me in our Tokyo building, still trying to be buddies despite everyone knowing him as the pottery guy who had destroyed his colleagues' relationship through elaborate therapeutic deception.